Coming up today on the Nick Craig Show, the Progressive Caucus in Washington, D.C. has unveiled their contract with America ahead of the midterm elections later on this year. I'll have all the details coming up. And a good Thursday morning to you. Welcome into the Nick Craig Show, streaming live this morning on YouTube, Rumble, X, and Facebook. Don't forget, if you miss any portion of the program or maybe want to take it on demand, you can do so in your favorite podcast app. It's real simple. Just search for the Nick Craig Show in your favorite app or visit the website nickcraig.com, where you'll catch each and every episode. You can also check it out on our various live and pre-recorded video feeds. Thanks to the law group here in Wilmington for their continued support of the program as well. Melissa Gott and her team. Visit them online for any legal questions or concerns you might be dealing with. lawgroupnc.com or give them a call, 910-251-6088. A lot of the coverage here on the Nick Craig Show is going to shift as we get later into this year to the midterm elections. We'll, of course, be focusing on the big topics and the big stories here in North Carolina. We have a major U.S. Senate race that is taking place, which will pit Michael Whatley versus the former Democrat governor here in North Carolina, Roy Cooper. You're very familiar with that race, with that contest. We'll keep you up to date with everything on that. Of course, the congressional delegation running as well. CD1, Congressional District 1 here in North Carolina. That's up in the northeastern half of the state where Don Davis is currently the Democrat representative. Some redistricting late last year by the North Carolina General Assembly looks to make that a more competitive district for Republicans. Lori Buckout, if that name sounds familiar, she ran against Davis back in 2024. She is seeking to battle him out again in that race. So there's going to be a lot going on with the midterm elections here in North Carolina. We'll keep a close eye on that. But more nationally, you're going to see, and we'll continue to cover what Democrats are doing across the country, because you are going to begin to see, at least I believe, a unified message, or a close to unified message from Democrats, from liberals, from progressives as they try and perform well in the midterms, which, as I have stated multiple times and will continue to state, there's a high probability of. Not because Donald Trump is terrible, not because the Republicans are awful, but because that's how midterm elections go. You look back at history, the party that is in charge, which is in this case right now, the Republican Party, they do not fare well in midterm elections. The same is also true when Democrats are in power and Democrats are in charge. You can go back and look at the 2022 midterm elections that took place with Joe Biden in the Oval Office. Did not fare well for Democrats across the United States, and especially here in North Carolina. So I'm going to be keeping a close eye on that, and we've got our first hint of what is going on, especially with the more radical wing of the Democrat Party. And this is, of course, relevant because there, I believe, remains a large power struggle within the Democrat Party. You've got your more mainstream Democrats, right? You've got your Hakeem Jeffries and your Chuck Schumers. These are the leaders of the Democrats, leaders, and maybe I need to put that in some air quotes, but leaders of the Democrat Party in Washington, D.C. These are the guys that are constantly in front of the cameras. These are the guys that have to, wrangle the cats, as it's described, to try and get enough Democrat cohesion on any given issue, not to pass legislation because they, of course, don't have the majority to do that, but to fight back against what the Republicans are doing. And so you've got individuals like Jeffries and Schumer that try and pretend and try and play closer to the middle because that's what they have to do to win over some of their voters, some of their fellow members in Congress. Then, of course, you've got the progressive radical wing of the Democrat Party that wants complete and total power. They don't just want total control and power over all of government. They still are struggling to get total power and control over their own party. We've seen this battle now for years. You saw it with the squad when Nancy Pelosi was in charge in the United States House. There was this constant battle between the squad, AOC, Rashida Tlaib, that crew, and Nancy Pelosi, more mainstream Democrats, and that battle continues. And it's why for a significant amount of time now, I have called what I see an ongoing civil war within the Democrat Party, as these more old school, proclaimed moderate Democrats like Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, which again, they're not, but they proclaim themselves as such, and they have to keep this public image of being more moderate as they try and hold off on what we see coming out of the more radical progressive left. And there's a reason for it. I believe, as crazy as somebody like Hakeem Jeffries is, as crazy as somebody like Chuck Schumer is, and Nancy Pelosi, and I can sit here and rattle off every member of Congress, as crazy as they are, they understand that what is being pushed by the far left of their party is not palatable to the vast majority of America. Now, I disagree with Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries on, what's it accurate to say, 99% of issues, 95% of issues, whatever the number is. It is very high. And while I don't agree with them, what I do believe is that they're intelligent enough individuals to understand that if they give up power to the progressives, while there might be a short-term bump, when the immediate aftermath of that, Democrats might perform well for a very short period of time, they understand, I believe, that they understand that long-term it will lead to the destruction and the demise of the Democrat Party. And there's a good reason for it, because the vast majority of ideas that we see laid out by the radical progressive left are not popular, are not palatable to the vast majority of Americans. And let's just lay out just a couple. We're not going to sit here and go through every single issue. I don't believe that'd be a good use of my time or yours. But let's just look at a couple of the issues in recent years that progressives have unequivocally been on the wrong side of. Let's take a look. Men in women's sports. That is one of the big ticket items for the progressive left, right? This is not new. You've heard this plenty of times in the past. Men and women's sports. Democrats, progressives, liberals, radicals, whatever name you might want to use, they will literally die on this hill because they believe that it is, I guess, a winning issue to proclaim to the American people that we're okay with dudes, biological men, participating in female sports. They're still talking about it today, after it has been made abundantly clear to not only me, to you, but to the rest of the American populace that this is not a popular issue. In politics, for those that are inside politics, you call these 80-20 issues. Issues in which 80% of the people agree that something is either good or bad. 80% of the American people, and this is backed up by political poll after political poll after political poll, 80+% of the American people do not think it is appropriate to have men participating in female sports throughout middle school, high school, and college. They just don't. Why? Because many of the American people surveyed in these responses have daughters, have granddaughters that participate in sports. And so they don't want their daughter or granddaughter to be participating in a sport with somebody else who is biologically different and has certain advantages based on said biology. I know. I said it. There's a difference between men and women. There's only two genders. I know. Radical, crazy thinking from me here on the Nick Craig Show. But it's the truth. And 80+% of the American people say, yeah, makes sense. We understand that there's basic biological differences between two different genders. Yes, we understand this stuff. So that's just one example of an issue that progressives are willing to die on the hill on that make absolutely no sense because nobody is on their side outside of their small fringe contingent on the left, which equates to about 20% of people, right? It's not overly popular. And so that's one example of what I'm talking about. One example why I believe that this civil war is still going on within the Democrat Party, why there's still this major power struggle that's taking place. Because people, again, like Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and the David Axelrods of the world, they very clearly understand that if those people on the far left that would push an issue like men and women's sports as a winning issue, if they take control of the Democrat Party, the Democrats are totally screwed. They're not going to be able to win anything going forward. So they understand the real risk that they face if those progressives take control of the entire party. I caught an interesting article over at a group called The American Prospect, and I'm going to lay this out beforehand. And I'm not saying this in a negative way, but I'm laying out the article that we're about to go through and read portions of. And this is reading directly from their website. The American Prospect, an independent voice for liberal thought. The American Prospect is devoted to promoting information based on public policy from a progressive perspective. The only reason I'm laying that out is as I'm going to read through part of the article, you'll understand what is going on here. And again, that's fine. You're allowed to have your progressive think tank, your progressive group, not bashing that at all, laying out, giving you some context as to what we're about to go through. And they've got this headline. The Progressive Caucus unveils its contract with America. On Wednesday, the Congressional Progressive Caucus introduced a wide-ranging agenda in advance of the midterm elections that rivals the birth of the Republican contract with America that was put forth by then Speaker of the United States House Newt Gingrich in 1994. This was, of course, during the Clinton administration. The article goes on to say, at a time of stagnant employment and rising inflation that is poised to worsen as the Strait of Hormuz crisis continues, the agenda focused on affordability in many forms, proposing bills that would lower the cost of housing, electricity, gasoline, childcare, prescription drugs, groceries, and consumer goods and services where the price is set through the extraction of personal information. This legislative package is called the New Affordability Agenda, and it would also tackle a wide range of affordability equations benefiting workers through mandates for guaranteed double time for overtime and 2 weeks of guaranteed paid vacation. It would also designate to place limits on super PACs that send money and give large sums of money to those in Congress. Now, right off the top, when you hear the New Affordability Agenda, my mind immediately flashes back to the so-called, the aptly named Inflation Reduction Act that we saw under Democrats under Joe Biden. It is now clear to anybody that reads, that follows anything politically, that the Inflation Reduction Act did not do anything to reduce said inflation. It was a big government spending bill pushed by Joe Biden and the Democrats back in 2021, 2022 that did not, in fact, make anything more affordable. It included a bunch of these green new scam deals, spending billions of dollars worth of your and my taxpayer monies on EV charging networks, spending hundreds of millions of dollars on Democrat progressive wish list items. If you want to reduce inflation as a government entity, and this is relevant all over the case, federal, state, and local, if you want to reduce inflation, which really what you're saying is you want to reduce the cost for your constituents. The easiest, simplest, and most clear-cut way to do that is to cut government spending, to cut government bloat, to cut government waste. Because if people are spending less on government, aka through their paychecks, which in many cases you're receiving every 2 weeks, you will immediately have more dollars in your pocket. If you have to give less of your money up to the state and federal government every time you get paid, you'll have more dollars. And once you have more dollars to spend, you have more buying power. It can lessen some of the impacts of things like inflation and things of that nature. But as you will hear coming up as we go through the New Affordability Agenda, this legislation is anything but that. And this is par for the course with Democrats with these very cute names of their legislation like the Inflation Reduction Act and now the New Affordability Agenda. In an interview with The Prospect, Representative Greg Cesar, a Democrat from Texas, called the agenda a direct response to the impression that the Democrat Party has strayed too far from its Green New Deal and Great Society roots, telling the prospect directly, and I quote, "After the 2024 election loss, Democrats from across the ideological spectrum were saying that we lost the trust of working people. This is our chance to rein that in. Most of the ideas are relatively new, stalwart concepts that Democrat candidates run across the country, like banning congressional stock trading, are likely to come later." This Democrat representative from Texas, in his first term as the Progressive Caucus chair, called their agenda, quote, "the tip of the spear," and said that the caucus would obviously be fighting for more than 10 bills next year. But he saw the opportunity for a package that the entire party, and this is key, that the entire party can come together on. And that is going to be, to me, kind of the million-dollar question with something like this. Can all Democrats across Congress come together on something that is being pushed exclusively by the Progressive Caucus? That remains unknown, unseen as of right now, but could be an interesting portion of it. Two of the co-authors of the legislation, Representative Seth Major and Josh Riley, who are not Progressive Caucus members, co-sponsored the legislation. Riley represents a swing district, and the new affordability agenda is backed up with polling from Data for Progress, which of course is a left-wing polling entity, showing broad appeal with all policies having at least 65% support, including between 59 and 78% backing from Republicans. Back to the Democrat from Texas saying this agenda can help us build a new consensus this year within the Democrat Party, who said that he had begun talking with top Democrats in committees of jurisdiction who would chair the committees if Democrats take control in the midterms and would be in position to pass said legislation. He reportedly is also engaged with House Democrat leader Hakeem Jeffries on the agenda as well, alongside other rank and file members. Very interesting. The caucus spent close to a year deputizing its members to come up with the slate of policies, enlisting assistance and advice from current and former policymakers, union leaders, and progressive economists. 22 organizations, all very far left-wing, endorsed said agenda. Former Federal Trade Commission Chair Lena Khan, who, by the way, was a disaster when she was the head of the Federal Trade Commission, essentially blocking any sort of merger and acquisition deal that was taking place in the United States. She was the FTC chair that tried to sue Microsoft and Xbox to break them up, spent God knows how many tens of hundreds of millions of dollars trying to break up Xbox and Microsoft, was woefully unsuccessful in doing that. Terrible FTC chairwoman. She wrote, because she endorsed it, "At a time when Americans are facing not just an affordability crisis, but also a deep sense of economic issues and pressures, we need a policy agenda that will deliver real relief and take on corporate abuse. It's terrific to see a legislative plan that will address these pain points and steer towards an economy that is more fair and competitive." Folks, we have seen example after example after example here in North Carolina, in other states, up in Washington, D.C., and I don't have any other nice way to say this, but I'll make it as clear as possible. Democrats are not capable of overseeing an economy. Their willingness to spend money does not allow them to oversee government and government spending in an efficient or an effective manner. We have seen it time and time again. The book is already written. The movie is already produced. They are incapable because their big government tax and spend policies always seep through. They are incapable of managing the economy. Here, need an example. North Carolina prior to 2010, after 100 years of Democrat control. What did the state of North Carolina look like when Republicans took control of the North Carolina General Assembly in 2011? The state was freaking broke. They owed hundreds of millions of dollars to the federal government in terms of medical debt. Taxes were some of the highest anywhere in the Southeast. State employees, including teachers who are going to be protesting tomorrow in Raleigh, they were furloughed from their job. I mean, it's just insane. They have no ability to manage an economy at all. Great comment coming in saying that they're also incapable of running a simple quality Leering Center. It's a great point. Can't even manage the Leering Center. And we know that how important that is to everything moving forward. Great comment. Appreciate it coming in on our Rumble live chat this morning. We're going to take a quick break here. We'll get back to this article over at the American Prospect about this brand new contract with America that progressives look to roll out here, kind of lay out to the American voters in 2026 and say, hey, give us power, give us authority, aka vote for us in the midterm elections. And when we get elected, these are the policies that we're going to move forward on. We'll get into more of this coming up here in just a couple of minutes. But before that, I want to thank the law group here in Wilmington and thank them for their continued support of the Nick Craig Show, and remind you that if you have any legal questions or challenges, make sure you put your trust in the law group. Since 2003, Melissa Gott and her experienced team of attorneys have provided high-quality, affordable legal services across the eastern half of our state. Whether you're facing a divorce, navigating a real estate transaction, or maybe you're in a position where you need a strong defense, no matter the issue, the law group has your back. Their dedicated team ensures your questions are answered and issues are resolved as quickly as possible. Great news, ladies and gentlemen. They're located in downtown Wilmington, and they're just a phone call away at 910-251-6088, or you can visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. That's 910-251-6088, or their website, lawgroupnc.com. You head on over to their website. You can meet the team. You can read about Melissa and all of the great people and all the great folks over there at the law group. You can see the areas of practice in which they work. And one of the great features of lawgroupnc.com is their blog, where they discuss a variety of different legal issues and challenges. It's a great first step to figuring out whether you are in the business and need some legal representation. All of that available, lawgroupnc.com. It's the law group. Experience and dedication you can rely on. We appreciate the law group and their continued support of the Nick Craig Show. Don't forget, coming up tonight, the Nick Craig Show monthly hangout. We'll be jumping on a Zoom call coming up tonight at 7 o'clock to describe, or to talk about, I should say, everything that is going on across the United States. Here in North Carolina and, of course, the globe, as major discussions continue over ongoing conflicts with Iran. All of that available, all of that coming up tonight, 7 o'clock, patreon.com/Nick Craig. If you are not already subscribed, you still have plenty of time to do so, at least before our hangout tonight. You'll find the links on there, patreon.com/Nick Craig. It's always a great time chatting with all of our great Patreon members. We'll see you coming up here in a little less than 12 hours, patreon.com/Nick Craig. All right, quick break. On the other side, we'll dive into more of the progressive contract with America as the Nick Craig Show rolls on, streaming live this morning, YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, and available 24/7 wherever you get your podcasts. And a good Thursday to you. Welcome back to the Nick Craig Show. Thanks for spending some time here. Don't forget, if you want access to our daily show notes and more, you can get access to all of that by visiting patreon.com/Nick Craig. You just head on over there, subscribe to the Patreon, $5, $10 a month. If you believe you're getting some value from the program and get access to our daily show notes and more, patreon.com/Nick Craig. The link also available over on the website, nickcraig.com. All right, back to the Progressive Contract with America. This is being rolled out and was just recently rolled out by the Congressional Progressive Caucus, mirroring similar contracts, at least in name and in theory and concept, to what Newt Gingrich put forward in the mid-1990s, as at the time it was called the Republican Contract with America during the Clinton administration, which for Newt Gingrich and Republicans was incredibly successful. Democrats trying to capture some of that same energy and do something similar. So we now have the details on this agenda. And I kind of laid through in the open, or walk through in the open, some of the major policy points of which they go through and explain in this article over at the American Prospect. So we'll start off with public drug production. And they will introduce a piece of legislation called the Affordable Drug Manufacturing Act, which will be introduced. It would create a program to directly make medications like insulin for diabetes, inhalers for asthma, opioid overdose treatments, and others in the United States. The drugs would then be sold to the public at a discount. The caucus estimates that the insulin price would drop to $50 a vial, and other prices would fall by more than half. Republican support for this is at 72% and is at even higher rates than the Democrats, which is only 68% in data from Progressive polling. Now, this is interesting because this is something that Donald Trump is already doing through a variety of different pieces of legislation and executive orders. You can look at things, and it's not a direct correlation, but you can look at the favored nations legislation, or the favored nations executive order brought forth by this administration to reduce drug prices, especially for things that are being manufactured and produced overseas. And so in terms of this, is there strong public support for making drugs, especially life-saving drugs like insulin for diabetes and inhalers for those that have asthma, more affordable? Absolutely. So, I mean, right off the top, great idea here. Again, the question would be execution for something like this, and not getting into a situation where you are socializing medicine, right? Because that's the concern when you start going down this road by a group that describes themselves as the Progressive Caucus. At what point does government not start seizing the means of production and making the drugs themselves, leading us into full-blown communism and full-blown socialism? So that's public drug production, that one of their first agenda items. Housing affordability. Oh, this ought to be a good one. The agenda adopts several ideas from the House Finance Service Committee ranking member Maxine Waters, the Democrat from California. And if there's any state, any representative that could really win over the issue of housing affordability, right, it's got to be a Democrat from California. I, of course, say that with incredible amounts of sarcasm. California has the most expensive housing anywhere in the United States of America, and I might begin to argue some of the most expensive housing anywhere in the world. California, of all places. Maxine Waters has got all the great ideas, including $20,000 in down payments from the federal government, closing costs, and interest rate buy-down assistance for first-time homeowners. So just giving you $20,000 if you're a first-time homeowner. To people like me and others that saved up every dollar we could to put a down payment on our house, well, screw you, but we'll give everybody else $20,000, as well as significant funding to build affordable and public housing and expand and an expansion of rental assistance. We know that this discussion over housing affordability is a total gimmick, a total joke. You want to make housing more affordable? I'm in full agreement with that. Do you know how you make housing more affordable? You cut government regulation. You make it more affordable for builders to build said housing. You don't have them sit on properties for years waiting for overburdensome government review and government regulation before they can actually stick a shovel into the ground and begin building housing. Anytime you hear a Democrat talk about affordable housing or housing affordability, you will never hear them talk about getting government out of the way. There is a surefire way to make housing more affordable. Get government bloat and regulation out of there. Instead, Maxine Waters' solution is to, well, we'll just give everybody $20,000 for a down payment if you're a first-time homeowner. We'll also cover your closing costs and we'll significantly reduce your interest rate. You don't think that's going to make housing more expensive? Because now with this $20,000 down payment, builders and developers will just jack up the price of their housing to minimize the cost. Because at the end of the day, right, it's free, quote unquote, government money. So no issue there at all. That's housing affordability. How about utility rate reform? Two of the progressive members are set to introduce a bill to address the rising cost of electricity. Among other things, the bill would ban utility monopolies from building into their rate increases reimbursement for lobbying, private jets for executives, or political contributions. A couple of those things I could be in agreement with. With this poll getting nearly 79%, or this idea getting support from 79% support from Democrats, Republicans, and independents. It would also direct the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to set a, quote, reasonable, end quote, rate of return for utility companies' rate setting, which would take into account a utility's monopoly status and stable cash flows. It would prioritize investments that save money over time, like boosting electrical grid capacity instead of unnecessary capital investments thrown in to allow for additional rate hikes. Customers under this proposed legislation, if it is to come to fruition, would save an estimated $500 a year. Now, I was surprised to see, again, this is coming from a group that is a described progressive think tank called the American Prospect. That's who's laying out and framing this discussion that we're having here about the progressive contract with America. Couple of major points missing from this. Part of the reason why electricity rates have gone up so dramatically over the last couple of years, though there's two major reasons, at least from my vantage point. One is that many of these utility companies have literally been legislated into bringing on solar and wind energy, which we know is incredibly expensive and incredibly unreliable just based on what it is. If the sun is not shining, turns out solar panels aren't generating a whole hell of a lot of electricity. If the wind is not blowing, wind farms do exactly the same thing. They don't generate a lot of electricity. And so companies, and we even look at an entity like Duke Energy here in North Carolina that have continually brought on these brand new energy utilities and these brand new forms of electrical generation. You and I are paying for it. They're very expensive and they're very unreliable. That's one of the major issues. The other is data centers, which are absolutely putting an oversized burden on the electrical grid. And the president laid out back just a couple of months ago the concept and this idea that for these major companies like Meta, that's Facebook and Instagram, like Google and Amazon, AWS, Amazon Web Services, and many of these other large tech companies, they need to be able to have regulatory approval to build their own electrical generation. Whether that's small modular reactors, whether that's steam, whatever it might be, natural gas, it doesn't matter. Give them the ability and have them have the plan to build out their own electrical generation. And then the problem kind of solves itself. But the reason that Google and Amazon and Meta and Facebook and Instagram, the reason that they don't build their own electrical generation, the reason they don't look at any of these things is because it's so prohibitive due to government regulation at both the state and federal level that they say, screw it. We'll just jump onto the Duke Energy grid and then they can jack up the rates. We don't care, right? And I don't fault them for it. They're not going to sit and wait 15 years for the federal government to approve an SMR plan. So they don't. They just jump onto the grid, and then you and I pay the burden of that cost for them sucking down the incredible amount of electricity and energy that they do. You noticing a recurring theme with all of these things? Everything that the Progressive Caucus here lays out in their demand list and their wish list here for the American contract, as they're calling it. If you just got more government out of the way, many of these problems ultimately would solve themselves in the free market. But Democrats are unwilling to do that. They're just unwilling. They don't believe that the free market can figure this stuff out. They believe, and this is, of course, the ideological difference that continues to exist between the political left and the political right. The left wants to control everything, right? And eventually leading to the seas of production. And the right says, business is pretty damn good at what it does. And again, folks, fundamental difference here between the left and the right. Look at grocery stores, right? That was a recent example because of Zohran Mamdani in New York City. It turns out private business, and I can go and rattle off every single grocery store company here in America if you need me to. It turns out they know how to operate a grocery store. They know what neighborhoods they need to build in. They know what products they need to stock. They've gotten this thing down to a freaking science at this point. They very clearly know how this stuff works. So why don't we just let them do that? And in large part, we do, right? There's a reason why there's not government-run grocery stores across the United States, because it just doesn't work. Now, Zohran Mamdani is going to give a crack at it in New York City. We'll see if he's successful. My guess is he won't. And it won't. Why? Because it just doesn't work. Government is not good at these kinds of things. Private business is, because at the end of the day, for private business, the bottom line is all that matters. And so all the decisions they make with an eye on the bottom line, right? Because they need to provide for if they're a publicly traded company, they need to provide for their shareholders. They have a contractual obligation to do so. Part of being a public company and having investors is that you are making smart decisions for said investors and not pissing all of their money away. So pretty standard thing here, but the Progressive Caucus can't really seem to wrap their head around it. They just can't do it. So back to the Progressive Caucus in Washington, D.C. and their contract with America that they are setting and beginning the process of rolling out ahead of the midterm elections coming up later on this year. Their next big policy item is unfair and deceptive pricing. The Fair Competition for Small Business Act, introduced by Representative Maxine Waters, again of California, gives state attorney generals explicit authority to win financial penalties for large retailers engaging in price discrimination, price fixing, or other anti-competitive behaviors. Again, government inserting itself into private business. This would fill the gap that the federal government has refused to enforce in the Robinson-Patman Act, a New Deal era law which banned price discrimination by chain stores. So once again, what is the solution to issues in the free market? For the Democrats, for the Progressive Caucus in Washington, D.C., their solution is to insert more government, which, again, you and I know very clearly, very well, will only exacerbate the problem. That's the issue. It's only going to make things more expensive every single time. I cannot list, and I'm willing to be challenged on this. I can't come up and list a single example where government got involved in something and made it better. Can you? You've lived your entire life. You've gone through, maybe in the public sector, maybe in the private sector. You've sat through and watched this stuff. Can you give me an example of when government made things better? Government made things more affordable? Government actually helped said people? The answer is no, because it doesn't happen. I mean, there's no other way to say it. It just doesn't happen. It's never happened. It always is a train wreck. We've got example after example of decades proving that to be the case. So I guess now we're going to get government in unfair and deceptive pricing. I can't imagine that completely blowing up in their face. How about a couple of other major issues from the caucus? Paid vacation time. The PTO Act would give 27 million workers who do currently not get paid vacation access for 2 weeks off per year. That would be in addition to any paid sick leave or family and medical leave at their employer. The provision would equate to $1,900 per year for a worker making $24 an hour. It is supported by 79% of Democrats in data from this group called Data for Progressives and their polling. So I assume that this is dealing with contract and hourly workers, where many cases you don't get PTO. As somebody that is a contract worker, I don't get PTO. If I'm not working, I don't get paid. And I don't expect to be paid, right? Because if I'm not producing a product, the company in which I'm working for is not getting any value. So I don't have PTO, and it's not a problem. I plan around it and make do. But again, this is a situation where now you've got the federal government under these alleged pieces of legislation that would go ahead and demand that these private businesses, many of which have contract employees, would guarantee them 2 weeks of PTO. So we'll see how that plays out. How about keeping in the business realm? Overtime pay. The Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 requires all eligible salaried employees to receive no less than time and a half for every hour worked above 40 in a week. This amendment to the Fair Labor Standards Act would expand that minimum to double time. The higher wages would put limits on overtime in overworking employees, and there are other provisions in the legislation to safeguard against that as well. The caucus estimates that over 13 million workers would feel this benefit and is supported by 69% of the public, according to polling data, with the president of the Economic Policy Institute saying, quote, "True affordability comes when working people earn enough to cover the cost of living with dignity and security." Yes, back to the old adage of people need to be able to earn a living wage, whatever that means. Earn a living wage based on what? What if you have, $1,000 a month in car loans, two $500 a month cars, which unfortunately is very common in America? Do you need to earn enough money for that? Is that considered a cost of living, or is that a financial decision that you've made yourself? Right? Because kind of key differences here. Not really expanded on, no surprise, by the Progressive Caucus. A couple of other things in this legislation dealing with super PACs, as there is a growing push, I would argue, across party lines to remove large amounts of money from elections, from politics, through a variety and litany of these different ideas. And so that's kind of the long and the short of this larger, it's not one piece of legislation, but these larger sets of proposals being introduced by the Congressional Progressive Caucus. They're calling it and equating it to the Republican contract with America that was pushed by Newt Gingrich and the Republicans during the Clinton administration in the mid-1990s. And so I've made some of my objections I've tried to at least make them pretty clear on this. There's a couple different ways in which I probably see this playing out. Number one, if there is not total buy-on from Democrats across a variety of this political spectrum in Washington, D.C. on this thing, then it's dead. And so that's got to be the starter here. And according to a couple of the members of Congress that were interviewed by the American Prospect, they indicate that they've already started to have those conversations, that they're dialoguing with people like Hakeem Jeffries, like a Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, and other high-ranking or influential Democrats in Washington, D.C. So that process has started. Doesn't really indicate what the buy-in is, or just just having a conversation doesn't necessarily mean it's moving in a beneficial direction. And so that's probably part number one. Part number two, of course, is going to be rolling this out to the American people. And I think with everything that we have seen in the past, this might be one of the harder issues that the Democrats have to deal with. Because again, on paper and based on the title of some of these ideas that are laid out here, right, going through them again, housing affordability, public drug production, utility rate reform, child care needs, paid vacation time, right, these things sound good. And to the Progressive Caucus's credit, they've done a masterful job and will probably try and do a masterful job of laying this stuff out as palatable to the vast majority of the American people. The issue you have is the second you peel back the first layer, the second you look beyond the name of what some of these things are, you can very clearly tell that many of these things are set to fail right from the start. Because we have seen example after example after example of these things not working. The true solution to affordability for progressives, for Democrats, for liberals, for Republicans, for conservatives, for every single American person, the true way to capture affordability, the true way to make your life more affordable is to remove government. Remove it. Just get it out of the way. You don't need government in the vast majority of places where it is right now. And when you get government involved in literally anything, the time starts getting delayed. And we know the old adage, time equals money. And so when you've got government involvement in things like housing, which they are very heavily involved in all across the country, that immediately adds to the bottom line. That immediately causes said housing, whether we're talking about single family, multi-housing, apartments, condo, it doesn't matter the type of housing. It immediately becomes more expensive. And so obviously the Progressive Caucus is not going to advocate for removing government out of things. They are big government people. They want government in every single facet of your life because they want to control it and lead us down the road of socialism and communism, which is what many of these things inevitably will turn into, especially like the drug thing. Oh, yeah, well, we're going to make all the drugs in the U.S. and we're going to heavily discount it. And then what? Take it over when it's not benefiting what your intended goal is. This stuff is a freaking disaster. Democrats have a golden opportunity here in 2026 just based on the fact that Republicans are in control and Republicans have the majority. It is going to be fascinating to see what kind of overall message they run with. I think the affordability message is going to be a strong one, but unfortunately, many of the things that they claim with affordability is just not practical. And many of it doesn't add up. And of course, the biggest issue that they're going to have to face is, you care about affordability now. You didn't have jack squat to say about it when you were passing the Inflation Reduction Act back in 2022 and causing prices to soar and skyrocket for everyday American citizens. So that's going to be a major problem for them to deal with. We'll keep an eye on the details right here on the Nick Craig Show. Quick preview of tomorrow's program. We are going to be diving into the North Carolina Association of Educators and their major protest, their May Day communism protest taking place in Raleigh as they are encouraging school teachers all across the state to leave the classroom, abandon your children, and go to Raleigh to bitch and complain about teacher pay. We'll be joined by Dr. Terry Stoops. He works for a group called Defending Education. That name sounds familiar. He's done a lot of work here in North Carolina. He'll join us coming up tomorrow morning, and we'll dive into all of the details of that, plus an interesting clip from Brian Proffitt. He is the vice president of the North Carolina Association of Educators. He is publicly bragging about closing schools across the state on Friday to allow teachers to go to Raleigh. And another example of why Democrats completely miss the message, completely miss the issue. You are claiming to be the Association of Educators. Educators have the responsibility, have the job of educating children. That's what they're employed. That's what they're paid to do. And you are wishing and willing into existence schools closing, hundreds and thousands of hours of learning loss combined across the state of North Carolina. It's completely illogical. We'll dive into all those details for the rally in Raleigh taking place tomorrow morning right here on the Nick Craig Show. Thanks to the Law Group here in Wilmington for their continued support. Visit them online, lawgroupnc.com. The Nick Craig Show streams live weekday mornings, 7 a.m., YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook. It's also available in your favorite podcast app and is heard weeknights, 9 to 10 p.m. on WBT Radio in Charlotte. Look forward to chatting with everybody tonight on our Nick Craig Show monthly Patreon hangout. If not, we'll see you tomorrow morning back right here